Awesome.
Okay, I think we are ready. Thank you for your patience getting this delayed a little bit. I would like to welcome you to one of the first breakout sessions of Power and Privilege. This is the fourth Power and Privilege, and we're super excited to have it and have CJ Harrell be one of our first presenters. She's going to talk about unpacking privilege and the zero waste movement. CJ is a student in the Bachelor of Liberal Arts, and she is involved in the Sustainability Club, and she is involved in student leadership on campus. So before CJ takes over, I'm going to just plug 2 additional sessions that are related to sustainability. One is the Sustainability Committee, along with other club members, are going to have a sustainable walk. Following this, it starts, it'll start a little bit late since we're sort of shifting things a little bit, but if you head right upstairs to 223 after this, it's just going to be an overview of some of the things that we do on campus and some of the things that perhaps we could do better. And then this afternoon at the 2 o'clock slot, there is the Juliana Plaintiffs, Models for Youth in Politics, and that's members of the Student Sustainability Club. So I wanted to plug that one as well. I would encourage you to go to as many as you can. There's lots of great sessions happening today. CJ is going to present, and then she'll have time for questions at the end. But please recognize that because this is one of the sessions that's being streamed, you'll need to use the microphone, and someone will provide you with one if you raise your hand. So thank you again.
Good morning. Cool. I would like to start off this presentation with a land acknowledgement. We live, the space that we call home is the Akwon land. It neighbors the Taku Kwan land, and it's really important when we're discussing power and privilege to first ground ourselves with the fact that this space that we have the privilege to discuss and learn from was once and still is occupied by this culture. Recognize that. So today I'm going to be talking about and analyzing the zero waste movement and the privilege that often goes left unsaid with it. I'll give a more thorough explanation as to what zero waste is in a few minutes, but the zero waste movement is essentially the process of managing one's production of waste. It's really important to, I think, discuss the privilege behind this in the zero waste community because I really have not heard a lot of people talk about it, and I think it's really important to recognize it. I'm also going to be sharing, I'm fortunate enough and privileged enough to be able to stand here, share my opinion and some of the research that I've done, as well as be a part of that community and this one. So let's start off by talking about the life cycle of a product, specifically a cotton t-shirt start to finish, from the very start to the very finish, the very end. It starts off with ingredient production. Cotton is usually grown in the United States, China, and India, and the cotton plant itself requires a lot of land and water to have a good yield and a lot of manual labor to gather. It also requires the largest amount of insecticides and pesticides out of most crops, which attributes to chemical runoff. It harms the health of field workers and the surrounding ecosystems. It also requires a lot of oil. So once you've gathered your cotton, it's usually barged over to India or China, where it's turned into fabric. And it's then dyed using chemicals that are harmful to workers and the environment, like chromium, lead, and mercury. All of those are cancer-causing agents, by the way. Once that's done, it's usually going to be shipped over to human labor factories in Turkey, Bangladesh, China, and India, where manual labor is required, but all of those countries have very, very loose labor laws and pay laws. And so poor conditions with low wages are often going to be found there. Once your t-shirt is made, it's going to be packaged up, usually in a box covered in plastic, and it's going to be shipped, trucked, or flown to the United States, which is going to create an enormous carbon footprint. This process of transporting apparel usually accounts for 10% of global carbon emissions. So you buy your t-shirt at a store, and then it kind of falls on you. What are you going to do with this product? The upkeep of a t-shirt is going to be the most expensive part, or the most resource-intensive part of its lifetime. One load of laundry usually requires 40 gallons of water, and dryers usually require 5 times more energy than washers do. Furthermore, most large brands sell what's called fast fashion, which are articles of clothing designed to fit the latest fashion trends. Because trends appear and disappear usually within a few weeks, these products are made to be inexpensive and of low quality. So when you're done with your t-shirt, if it is cheap, it's just going to fall apart. You throw it away. It's driven to a barge, which is then shipped to a landfill, usually in another country, and it's going to just increase its carbon footprint even more. Fast fashion is the second largest polluter, right after oil. So what is zero waste? The average American will generate about 4.5 pounds of trash every day. That's about 1,600 pounds every year. Half of that's going to end up in a landfill. So the zero waste movement is basically trying to personalize that number, take into account for it, and then minimize it. The Environmental Protection Agency's Zero Waste International Alliance definition is the conservation of all resources by means of responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of the products, packaging, materials without burning and with no discharge to land, water, or oil that threatens the environment or human health. This is a much simpler definition. The zero waste community follows what's called the 5 R's. I think it's a neat way to think about it. To refuse something, to reduce what you have, to reuse what you already have, to recycle, and to rot. Going into this with the biggest one being to refuse things right off of the bat. Learn to say no to single-use plastic and items that are eventually going to end up in a landfill. That's really important, and a lot of people forget that when you're handed a pamphlet, especially if it's, I guess pamphlets are paper, but still, if you're handed something right off the street, don't take it. It's going to end up in a landfill after you use it for a couple of minutes. The next is to reduce. Cut back on your general consumption of products as they take energy to be produced and to be disposed of. Reuse what you already have. Use a product more than once until it's truly no longer usable, and eventually invest in a product that's designed to be reused, recycled, or composted. Don't forget to also mend, patch, and repurpose what you already have. Next, if an item can't be refused, reduced, or reused, it should be able to be recycled. Finally, and this usually goes more in the kitchen, but it's really important to recognize that when you throw something away, like food waste, and it ends up in a landfill, it's not going to fully decompose, or not at the rate that if you were to compost it instead. So compost the food that you are producing, or the food waste that you're producing, so it doesn't end up in a landfill. So let's look next at who's doing this really cool movement. I want to say that everybody is, or that everybody's able to, but that's not the case, and that's why we're here to talk about it. The zero waste movement has really taken off after people like B. Johnson, Lauren Singer, Daniel Silverstein, and the Bonus took the lead through their blogs, books, and their TED Talks. So B. Johnson is known as the mother of the zero waste movement. She brought the 5 R's that we talked about earlier into the spotlight with her TED Talk, her blog, and her book, The Zero Waste Home. She definitely is the mother of the zero waste movement in this day and age. She's really cool. Lauren Singer and Daniel Silverstein are the founders of Package Free, which is one of the first large-scale zero waste companies based in New York City. They're also the founders of Trash is for Tossers, which is a blog about their process. Anne-Marie Bonneau, she's known as the Zero Waste Chef, and now her daughter too, share tips through their blogs about how to cut kitchen waste through. Their blogs are called The Plastic Free Chef and Zero Waste Chef, and they're a really cool team. I would definitely check them out as well. But the thing about all of these people is that they are white, they're middle class, they're able-bodied, and they live in urban environments. And you'll see that when I talk about social media, the major people adopting this movement are all from that same demographic. Let's talk about the levels of participation first, though. So a lot of people can adopt zero waste as a habit. It's relatively easy, I would say, in this space at least, to have it as a habit, just being aware if you have some education and some resources. Your entry into zero waste is often through recycling. You might want to cut your carbon footprint through driving less or carpooling or taking the bus, and avoiding single-use plastic. It requires a little bit of education and money. Or it doesn't require too much education and money, but it definitely requires time. When you start to take zero waste to a different level and it becomes a lifestyle, that's when you genuinely reflect and start to change your previous lifestyle through consistency. This requires time, money, and education. And then, my favorite, zero waste as a trend. It's the portrayal of zero waste through social media that usually results in this false sense of self. People usually only show the positive and perfected parts of the zero waste journey. These manicured versions of the zero waste lifestyle often do another thing. They create gentrification within the environmentalist community and monetization. So what gentrification is, if you haven't heard of it, it's the process of making a person or activity more refined or polite. This is usually done in urban districts in the United States, where homes, spaces, and communities are renovated to conform to a middle-class taste, which almost always is going to force the prior residents to leave. The prior residents are usually going to be lower class, so it's really, really bad. This is happening and has been happening to homes, districts, and communities and cultures for decades. It's through social media, its influencers, and its general advertising algorithms that the zero waste community has become such a gentrified lifestyle. It's become, I would say, upper to middle class. A huge part of this is because it has also been taken over by what are called investment brands, with ads showing young, able-bodied, white, middle-class individuals. This is perpetuating the idea that in order to be a part of this community, you must fit into these categories and look like these people. These are just some other examples. This always pops up on my Instagram at this point. Just constant ads about what I should be buying in order to fit into the zero waste community, which is not the case if you follow the 5 Rs. While buying something that is environmentally friendly, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The thing about trends in social media is that it'll often give some investment brands more appeal and more validity than others. You start to think that because who's using it, how it looks, and how often you see it, it's automatically a good product. The worst thing about this is that a lot of the trendy products that are actually often greenwashed corporate brands who can afford to advertise and sell to the masses. Greenwashing, or it's also called green sheen, is a form of advertising. It's a form of advertising based on making a product appear to be environmentally friendly, which allows that product to have an inflated price and target certain demographics. It's really similar, if you guys know what the pink tax is, which is a gender-based price discrimination, or it's a form of that. It's the same thing. It's really unfortunate when you accidentally purchase something that is greenwashed, as this so-called green product with a leaf on the front is likely owned by one of the largest corporations in the United States or world, and is likely not actually eco-friendly or worker-friendly. Here are some of my favorite examples, which I definitely have a lot of these brands in my home. I kind of just went through my kitchen and my bathroom and ended up Googling these brands and then what their parent brands are. Seventh Generation is owned by Unilever. Burt's Bees and Tom's is owned by Colgate and Palmolive, and then Simple Truth is owned by Kroger. It's owned by Clorox, and then it's owned by, which is owned by Kroger. So it's all the same. And while consumerism is not inherently a bad thing, again, our mixed economy is not made to be zero waste. Many smaller countries like Singapore have made efforts to adopt what's called a circular economy. A circular economy is an economy that aims to eliminate waste and reuse, share, repair, refurbish, remanufacture, and recycle to create a closed-loop system to minimize its resource input and thus its amount of waste, pollution, and carbon emissions. It tries to make equipment, infrastructure, and products that are going to last longer and be used longer. We have a mixed economy, which I would say that on the left, that's definitely oversimplifying our economy. But it's just a very simple way to look at it and to look at how a circular economy is essentially the 5 Rs. Earlier this year, Singapore's Ministry of Environment and Water Resources launched a zero waste master plan, which included adopting a circular economy. They're going to be doing this by shifting towards sustainable production and consumption around food waste, electronic waste, and packaging waste. They're also investing a lot of money into research, which is really beneficial towards, other countries as well. That research is hopefully going to be publicized, and so we might be able to catch on. So we know about the economics, we know about the 5 Rs, we know who's doing the 5 Rs. Let's try to actually figure out how you can find a zero waste product. Ask yourself these things. What's in it? Are the ingredients environmentally and worker friendly? Who's making it? Try to figure out if everyone in the process of creating this product was paid fair wages in fair conditions. The great thing about this one is that it's really, really challenging from start to finish to have ethically paid workers. And so if a company is able to pull that off, they're going to advertise it very well to you. So there is that. Who's the money going to? Shoot for buying local to minimize your carbon footprint and to support the local economy. Research the brand. You can literally, like I said, Google who owns blank or who is blank's parent company, and Google is pretty good about showing you who a company is actually owned by and where your money is actually going towards, and if something is being greenwashed. Will it hold up? Quality products that can be reused quality products that can be reused for a long time are definitely going to be best, but again, that is an investment of time and money. Avoiding packaging, purchasing products in bulk is almost always going to be cheaper for many reasons. Plus, you can bypass packaging altogether by bringing your own reusable containers. It's understandable that to find a truly zero-waste, packageless, quality product with a neutral carbon footprint is going to be expensive, and that's really unfortunate. It's especially unfortunate that greenwashed, low-quality, heavily packaged products are also going to be expensive because they can get away with it. Regardless, it's a privilege to be able to access, purchase, use, and be a part of the zero waste community. Let's look again at who can actually do this. The people that can go zero waste first must have a couple of things. Physiologically, the people have to have enough food, they have to have a safe space to live, and they have to generally be healthy. Safety. People who have financial security and the ability to express themselves through consumption. Love and belonging. People who have the love and support of others and won't be shamed or ostracized for choosing this lifestyle. They have to have these 3 things. And it's funny, because this looks a lot like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because it is. We're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is the premise of understanding privilege. Being able to understand this pyramid is really important. You need to first have a sense of physiological security, safety, and belonging before you can start changing your consumption habits, which means you need to be about here in order to start decreasing your consumption. And even if you are at that point, there are still things that you may never be able to do in a zero-waste lifestyle. Another way to look at this is to reanalyze the 5 R's, starting with the refusal of a product. Some people just can't afford or have access to other options. Zero-waste stores are hard to come by in rural areas like Alaska. Some people also aren't able to use alternative products. Something that I actually hadn't ever thought about until this semester is the fact that a lot of people, like people that are older or people with disabilities, even if they have the money or time or education to go zero waste, they simply are unable to use anything but a plastic straw. And that's okay. That's understandable. There's this other thing called supermarket refusal, which is really interesting to me. It's a form of activism in the zero waste community by going into a store, purchasing an item, and leaving the plastic wrapper in the store. So let's say you go into a Fred Meyer's, you buy a bag of grapes, you take the grapes out of the bag, and then you go to somebody and you say, here's your plastic, please take care of it. This is meant to be to direct the public eye towards corporate environmental accountability. But on the consumer side, this is a huge form of entitlement that not everybody has. Not everybody is either comfortable or it feels socially acceptable for them to go into a store and do these things. People also have conflicting lifestyles. It's really hard for people that have a family or have other things that they need to do in life they can't just give that up in order to adopt this other lifestyle. Next is reduction. Geographic isolation is a huge thing in Alaska. It makes it nearly impossible to import anything without carbon emission. Reuse. It requires time and an education on how to do it. Recycling. Your community may not have the institutional investment to want to recycle in the first place, and if it does, you might not be able to actually transport your recycling to that place, and if you do, you might not have the funds that are necessary to pay for the fees to recycle. Rotting. It requires some education. Contrary to popular belief, you can't just throw your food scraps into a bucket and call it good. You need to know how to do it safely, and especially if you live in a cramped environment, or let's say you have some roommates or you have a large family, but you're living in this small environment, you can try to compost, you can try to worm compost is what I'm mostly thinking about. But if you don't do it correctly, or if you're in such a small space, that can be a health and safety hazard. The place that you live at, also like your landlord, might just not allow it. So it's a privilege to have an open enough environment to where you can do that. It's also challenging in Alaska if you are trying to do it outdoors, as we do have outside friends called bears and moose, and putting up a fence for that is pretty challenging. The zero waste movement also usually focuses on the individual consumerist level, but changes need to happen on the communal level as well. It didn't take that long for me to research what change is already happening in Alaska, and I am pretty impressed by what we're accomplishing. In Denali, which is near where I live, they launched, Denali National Park launched the Denali Zero Landfill Project by installing recycling facilities using recyclable using recyclable packaging products and compostable food waste, or composting food waste. This decreased their landfill production by 46% from 2016 to 2018, and then since then by another 30%. That's pretty impressive. They're already over the 50% limit. In Willow, they passed a plastic bag ban, and then Anchorage did the same. all this year, which is pretty exceptional. And then in Southeast Alaska, Juneau, Haines, Petersburg, and Sitka have partnered with Net Your Problem to launch an effort this year to send old, derelict seine and gill nets to a recycler in Richmond, British Columbia. So they're sending their nets there, but then any excess nets are also being sent to the UK, which is where they had been sent before that. The only problem now with that specific thing, which I wouldn't call it a problem, but the last thing that they need to take care of is the fact that there are nets that still require lead and still have lead in them, but those are not recyclable at all at this point. So the takeaway of this, please be aware of your privilege. Please don't shame other people for not being able to do the things that you're able to do, and understand that a lot of the privilege that you have, or lack of privilege or privilege that other people don't have, it's not, you can't always see it. People aren't going to tell you always why they can't do something. They might not want to share it, and so it's really important to not shame people or ostracize people when they just aren't able to follow this thing. Zero waste is a really, really cool movement, and it's a really cool lifestyle, but not everybody can do it. Also, if you can't do it, please look out for greenwashing. It's a really big issue. Educate others while you're at it, and be involved with your community. Anybody have any questions?
Hi. I just wanted to say, it's more of a comment. I really appreciate this because I am a child of coal country. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and also oil country, Texas. So both sides of my family, my grandfathers were oil rig workers and coal miners, and then I'm the oddball because I'm a park ranger. So I have struggled a lot in both my career and when I went to grad school for this, because people are entitled and they don't even realize it. And a lot of people just dismissed people that were in my family as bad people because they couldn't, and I'm like, they can't afford to live like this. And I just really appreciate you recognizing that. It's the first time I've ever been to anything where someone has actually recognized that, which is really important. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I just had a follow-up question about the Denali waste management strategy, or whatever it was. Was that just in the park, like a national park strategy, or was it in the surrounding community?
I think it was just in the park because it was connected to a few other parks in the lower 48 as well. So I think it's just park-based. I would love for it to be community-based, though, too.
Thank you for your presentation. So if there are people who can't adopt a full zero waste lifestyle for whatever reason, what are some tips or something small, maybe in your experience, that they could adopt that is a little more simple than going completely zero waste?
Totally. Yeah, I wanted to add that, but I also didn't want to be like, zero waste is a privilege, but also here's how you can do it anyways. But talking about zero waste as a habit instead of a lifestyle, and wow, I could go on that question. That's a really good question. I think the biggest thing is, and everybody has a different opinion about this, but I would say recycling is really important. Also being aware of who your money is going to, because I think that there are alternatives. There are affordable ways to cut back on the amount of packaging that you have. Buying in bulk is expensive immediately when you go and buy things in bulk, but at the same time, you still don't have to buy you can go to a bookstore, but you don't have to actually buy 20 pounds of rice. You can still just buy that pound, but it is going to be cheaper. So I think buying in bulk is a good thing. Fred Meyers does that, which is great. Recycling, and then yeah, there's a lot of things you can do. Oh, yeah. I forgot one of them. A big thing that you can do, thank you, Laura, and I forgot to mention that, is that student government actually just passed a bill to install or to have dryer racks available at the lodge desk for checkout. We were talking earlier about how your laundry, especially drying laundry, is it has a pretty big carbon footprint, essentially. And so if you can either invest in a drying rack, that's going to help a lot. I'm probably never going to, because I'm just going to hang my clothes on every surface that I have in my home. But if you're on campus, you can check out drying racks soon, and that's going to cut your carbon footprint pretty significantly.
Hi. You started your talk about the T-shirt, and my first question came up in my mind. What are alternative fabrics to cotton that might be better for the environment?
That's a really good question that I think that I'm sure that there is one specific fabric that is like does everything, but it's going to be expensive to produce. I know that just buying secondhand is always going to be better. It's like it doesn't take any energy to get something secondhand. When it comes to alternative fabrics, if anybody like actually knows the answer to that, I would appreciate it. But I would say, I know that hemp requires very little water and very little land. But again, that's definitely something that is both, I'm unsure why it's expensive, but it is pretty expensive. So, yeah. Cool.
I think when you talked about the fabrics and the T-shirt, there is an actual podcast, and it's more economically related, but it's with the Planet Money Group, and they actually traced the life of a T-shirt all the way through the process you were describing in more economic terms, but also identified some of the environmental challenges because of where the cotton is grown or purchased and then where it's processed. But I think thinking about sustainable materials, one of the problems we do have is a lot of our clothing materials are now made from oil products, and really all you can do is reuse what's out there. I think it is important to think about maybe reuse of clothing as much as possible, because there is already so much clothing out there that can be repurposed. So I think that's probably one of the better ways to go. One of the other things that's totally sustainable that had lost favor when we ended up with Dacron and some of nylon and some of these other clothing materials is wool. And in the outdoor community, there's a big resurgence in smart wool and new technologies for making wool light and comfortable. And so that is definitely a sustainable fabric product that we might be able to try and encourage more use, especially in a place like Alaska where it does get cooler.
Thank you, Sam. Awesome.
Hi, I really liked your presentation, and going back to the kind of what can lower income families do to be more eco-friendly, I was kind of thinking a lot of practices they already have in place are maybe more sustainable than we really think about, like shopping at Goodwill, reusing things like that, or making homemade foods and kind of like stuff like that, canning. So I think it's important to also acknowledge that like there is stuff that we could look at that they already have in place that we could do too, you know?
Absolutely. Those things are also unfortunately stigmatized too in some ways, and I think recognizing that sometimes we think that something isn't sustainable because we have this subconscious stigma behind it, but it actually might be. So that's great.
Ganeshji, ooh, that was loud. Ganeshji Shkuyana for doing the land acknowledgement at the beginning of your presentation. And going back to this comment too, thank you so much for saying something, because I grew up in a poor family as well, and we did a lot of reusing and recycling and shopping at Goodwill, and also going back to the land acknowledgement, thinking about how the stewards of this land have survived and thrived and kept this land healthy since time immemorial. So looking at indigenous ways of also, because that also goes often unnoticed indigenous environmentalism, but to us that's just a way of life, respecting the land, respecting our products. So yeah, thank you.
I also just wanted to say, as far as like carbon footprints, and this has privilege associated with it as well, but like either being subsistence or being vegetarian or vegan minimizes carbon footprints a lot, just because things like cows take up, they release a lot of methane first off, and they also take up a lot of land and water. But there are privileges associated with that. If you have like an iron deficiency, that might not be the best idea. If like you grew up a certain way, like the change might be difficult. There are all number of health reasons that it might be difficult to do, but if you're able, like that's also a way to minimize. Yeah.
I actually did want to talk about that, but seeing that I'm not vegetarian or vegan, I didn't feel qualified. But that is a really good point, too. Yeah.
I just had a question I don't know the answer to. Does Juneau's recycling still get recycled? Because one thing people don't think about is voting. What your vote matters, because the trade war with China is making it so that a lot of cities are not able to sell their recycling to China anymore, which means they're saying they're recycling it, but they're not, because China won't buy it because they're mad at us. Rightfully so. And so I think it's really important to research where your recycling is actually going to. And I don't know if Juneau is, hopefully Juneau is still actually recycling their products, but some cities are struggling with that. And anybody can vote. It doesn't, with the caveat that there's lots of restraints on voting, especially in the South, but anyone has the power to vote. So that's a very good thing to do.
Yeah. It's a good thing to think about, too, and be aware of. Do you know more about that? Lora would know more than me.
Same thing happens. In most locations, even where they take all number plastics are not recycled. Sam, you should probably answer this, or someone else. I'm not sure which ones in Juneau are, probably 1 and 2. Glass is reused. CJ and I had this conversation yesterday, because I was saying people I know just throw their glass away because it's not recycled, and how there's this weird issue of thinking somehow reuse is worse of a outcome than recycled. So I don't know, do you know where all the numbers that are recycled are? Okay, does anyone in the audience know? Usually it's 1 and 2. It's never number 3, I can tell you that. That one is never recycled. But 1 and 2s are. Okay. I will say, and again, I'm plugging the Sustainability Committee's Sustainability Walk with the Sustainability Club that's going to start in a little bit. Sonia Nagorski and Will Elliott are part of the Sustainability Committee, and they're going to talk about this issue. So I'm passing the responsibility of knowledge onto them.
This is more a comment than a question, but manufacturers use a polite political term of, what is it? Excuse me, I'm getting all there. They make products self-destruct. And there's nothing much we can do about that. I've got a microwave that recently quit working because the turntable didn't work. Well, I'm not a mechanic, but I knew that there was probably a little motor in there that I could replace. So I went over to Action Appliance and got the little motor, put it in, and the new motor did not work. So I took it back, got another one, and the other one did not work. I can get it to work if I give the turntable a little spin before I push the button. But it's planned obsolescence, was the term I was trying to think of earlier. And I don't know what we can do as a community, as a nation, to fight that. But corporations are making huge profits because they're producing products that only have about 10% of the life that they could have. And I don't know, maybe we could all rebel by quit buying microwaves. But it is a problem there it's difficult for us to do anything about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. There's this term that I like to use, which is voting with your dollars too, and just like buying things if you can that do have a long lifespan, and buying from a company or a corporation that at least a little bit cares about the quality of their product. Because you're totally right. Like when I was talking about fast fashion earlier, that applies to fashion and the cotton t-shirt, but that can be applied to just about any type of product as well. I mean, microwaves aren't necessarily a fashion statement, but it's still, like, you know what I mean. But yeah, you're absolutely right. What's that term again?
Planned obsolescence.
Planned obsolescence.
Two parts to that term. Corporations also use perceived obsolescence, so that you're not with it if you don't have a current product. Our landfill.
We can't hear any of those comments online.
Sorry, Sam.
Corporations promote perceived obsolescence, where they try to convince people that a product is obsolete long before it actually is. I know you could go to the dump if you wanted to, and you could collect appliances and find that a majority of them work perfectly fine, but they're not the current fashion trend. That's a huge issue.
So I think in thinking about how to become more sustainable, one of the things that I've started doing is thinking about using what I have before buying something new. And then also, we're getting to the point where I think it really is going to need a major feeling or a trend, as you were talking about, of a lifestyle change, a change in how we live. The planned obsolescence we kind of grew into because people wanted more convenience for less and less cost, and so manufacturers were able to find ways to build things less expensively, but they also didn't last as long. And then also for their corporate sustainability, if people bought something and then didn't have to repair it or didn't have to buy something new, that corporation, unless there were an infinite supply of new people coming online that needed that product, would go out of business. And so they do have some amount of planned obsolescence. But I think as a society, if we're going to become more sustainable, we need to think about what are we using and what do we actually need to go out and purchase. I mean, if you think about the clothing again, 100 years ago, most people made or had their own clothes made. They didn't go out to a store and purchase clothes. And now 100 years later, very, very few people make their own clothes. Everybody kind of goes out and purchases. So that was a complete change in lifestyle. I think we're going to need to start thinking about different changes, and I don't know what that next phase ends up being, but we have to be careful about how do we do that within this corporate structure where everything that we consume or everything that we use is a consumption product.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've heard corporate managers say that they need planned obsolescence to promote employment. And my first argument to that is, let's hire more teachers and make products that last longer so we can afford to pay those teachers.
Definitely. I'm just going to wrap this up. I appreciate like all of these comments. This is so incredible to have you guys here and have this discussion. I'll be at the table, I think it's at 7:30. It's the very end part of Power and Privilege. But yeah, I'm just going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much. If you want, myself and the NRSC made some reusable bags out of old t-shirts. They're, when you're exiting, they're just on a table there. So feel free to grab those. But thank you guys so much.
Before we depart, oh, it's off. Let me just use this one. I also have a loud voice. I don't like to use a microphone unless I have to. But I want to thank you all for coming and thank CJ for putting this together. Here's a certificate of her hard work and encourage you all to attend other sessions and have a great day.
Certificate here. Yeah. Was that an okay time to stop?
Yeah, we're almost